Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. Check out these monitors behind me. These are feeds coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center from all of our stations and affiliates around the country. For the next hour, you and I are going to go through what is happening back there and all around the world. Let's begin. President Trump is holding his first cabinet meeting of his second administration today. And guess what? Elon Musk is going to be there and have a seat at the table. We're going to have a preview. Plus, a huge win for House Speaker Mike Johnson and President Trump's agenda. The House narrowly passed its $4.5 trillion budget resolution. What's in and what's out of the plan, and what comes next. And of course, we're following the largest measles outbreak ever in Texas. How state officials are responding as cases continue to grow. This is CBS News 24/7. President Trump and his new cabinet will meet all together for the very first time in about an hour. The meeting comes as the federal workforce has seen thousands of cuts, and another mass layoff could be on the way. CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro is live from Washington, D.C. and joins me to preview this. So Aaron, look, I've been around since the Carter years. I mean, I was around before that, but not paying attention. And I don't know if I've ever seen a cabinet meeting where someone who's not in the cabinet, especially for the very first one, actually has a seat at the table. How unprecedented is this?
Vlad, good to be with you. Yeah, what's really notable about this is not only will Elon Musk be present at this cabinet meeting, but White House officials said this morning that a good chunk of this meeting could be talking about what they claim are waste, fraud, and abuse, kind of the mission of DOGE. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that that would be a big topic of discussion amongst these cabinet secretaries for their first meeting. Now, the first meeting is usually a chance for these newly appointed or confirmed cabinet secretaries to talk about what they want to do with the certain agencies. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins laid out a 5-pronged plan to combat the avian flu and the price of eggs that she said she would talk about during this cabinet meeting. But Elon Musk being present there certainly shifts the conversation towards how these cabinet secretaries have been interacting with him. And President Trump posted this morning saying that all cabinet secretaries love working with Elon Musk.
Yeah, it's not just the price of eggs, though. As you know, Aaron, that's up. Price of beef is up. Measles are also up in the state of Texas. So is there anything that you're hearing that's actually going to get done whereby these cabinet officials will address some of the more pressing issues that are facing Americans right at this moment?
Yeah, we're starting to hear from these cabinet secretaries as they're doing morning interviews. But so far, all we've heard, at least from the public face of the White House, is mainly on Elon Musk's presence.
All right, let me ask you about this source that has told CBS News that there's a possible memo from the Office of Personnel Management and the Office of Management and Budget, which will potentially order another mass layoff of federal workers. What do we know about this? And it's going to get to a point where we're not going to have anybody working at the federal government.
Yeah, this memo expected to come at some point today is going to direct agencies to prepare for large-scale firing, sources have told CBS News. The guidance given to these government agencies is to submit these, quote, reorganization plans by March 13 for, quote, huge reductions in force. And this was something President Trump put out in an executive order a week or so ago, saying that federal agencies will have to work with DOGE on this, but it's certainly the latest step in the effort to cut down the federal workforce. So while we have seen probationary employees let go, we could see even bigger numbers in the coming weeks.
All right, Aaron Navarro for us in Washington. Aaron, thank you very much.
Take care.
All right, let's talk about the budget. The House narrowly passed a budget plan in a late-night vote that supports President Trump's legislative agenda. House Speaker Mike Johnson said the president was, quote, a big help, and adds that he got on phone calls with potential holdouts. But the budget is not a done deal yet.
This is the first important step in opening up the reconciliation process. We have a lot of hard work ahead of us, but we are going to deliver the America First agenda. We're going to deliver all of it, not just parts of it, and this was the first step in that process.
I want to bring in CBS News congressional reporter Torian Small, who joins me now from Capitol Hill. So Torian, let's talk about what's being cut. We know that taxes are going to be cut, but let's talk about some of the services that the working poor rely on, including Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP programs. What are you hearing?
So I should at least start with the argument that Republicans are making. They're saying this budget resolution, this blueprint isn't including policy. It's just a fiscal framework for the eventual spending bill that would come corresponding to this. This is the argument Democrats are making, however. They say that in this resolution are instructions to the House Energy and Commerce Committee that has in its purview a crucial safety net being Medicaid, and it's asking leaders there to cut about $880 billion. Democrats say if you do the math, there just aren't too many other places they could find that money, which is why they're sounding the alarm on potentially cuts to Medicaid.
So, as you know, GOP leaders in the Senate have proposed a separate plan. What are we hearing about the likelihood of both chambers working together to adopt the House version?
Well, this is the process that Republicans in the Senate side, my side of the chamber right now, expected. I talked to Senator Lindsey Graham, who chairs the Budget Committee, as they were in the heat of the turmoil of coming off the heels of Donald Trump endorsing the House version of that bill, the likes of Elon Musk telling them to kill their version of the bill and just move forward with the House version. He said, listen, they're going to pass theirs because they understand that it's not always a cakewalk for House Republicans to come together for any type of consensus. They said now they understand that conference happens next. They'll have to butt heads and decide where they could meet in the middle. The biggest sticking point, though, is that $4.5 trillion deficit that would come if they expand the 2017 Jobs and Tax Cuts Act.
So, Torian, I mean, Democrats really don't have a lot of wiggle room here, given that they do not control either chamber. But what are they doing?
Yeah, they're still reeling after last night's very dramatic vote, I should say. At one point, it was expected that this would be tabled, considering that 3 Republicans had voted against it. Democrats had their heads held high as they left the chambers, but then there was a quick about face. We saw cars turn around to go back to a vote because it appeared that the speaker had the numbers in his favor to pass it. But at this point, they're looking to talk directly to the voters. They're going to be messaging over the next couple of years, talking about those cuts, like I said, to Medicaid, to other safety net programs, and saying, hey, voters, this is what you voted for. You should be concerned as we are. They're also leaning into the protests that are happening, not just at the Capitol, but at these town halls that we've seen over the past couple of weeks. Angry constituents sounding off, voicing their frustrations to these Republican lawmakers, especially after we saw massive cuts to federal workers that don't just impact people here in D.C., but also in their home districts.
Important point there. Torian Small for us on Capitol Hill. Torian, thank you very much. All right, the Trump administration is now threatening jail time for undocumented immigrants who fail to sign up for a government registry. It applies to immigrants over the age of 13 who enter the country illegally. The White House says it would give unregistered migrants and immigrants a chance to register through an online form, but that form hasn't even been published yet. Meanwhile, the president is introducing a new way for some people to gain U.S. citizenship for a very steep price. He's calling it a gold card. Listen to this.
It's a road to citizenship for people, and essentially people of wealth or people of great talent, where people of wealth pay for those people of talent to get in, meaning companies will pay for people to get in and to have long-term status in the country.
So according to the president, the way it would work is for $5 million, wealthy foreigners can buy their way to becoming legal U.S. residents and perhaps even citizens. President Trump says the gold card will be rolled out in the next 2 weeks. He claims he doesn't need congressional approval. The gold card will reportedly replace a similar type of visa known as the EB-5, which grants U.S. residency to some foreign investors. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is coming to the White House on Friday. That's according to President Trump. The visit comes as the U.S. finalizes a deal with Ukraine to access its rare minerals. CBS News foreign correspondent Rameen Asensio joins me now from our London bureau to talk more about this. Ramey, this is sort of interesting. I mean, it's not as if the United States, throughout the course of its 250-year history, has not exploited other countries for their natural resources in exchange for perhaps protection or in exchange for arms or what have you. But Zelensky has been sort of pushing back on this minerals deal, but then something changed. What was that?
Hey, Vlad. Yeah, good to see you. Well, it seems like Ukraine maybe got a better deal. And I say seems because key details haven't been made public just yet. But let me throw out one number to start this all off. $500 billion. And that it was the demand from Trump that Ukraine give the U.S. $500 billion, $500 billion here, in profits from the sale of its minerals. Zelensky, though, we know that he said that that was too much, so we might infer at least that that number is lower. Now, Trump had claimed the U.S. gave $350 billion in aid to Ukraine in the past 3 years, but a U.S. government watchdog has calculated that at something about half of that, $183 billion. All this to say is that we started out with $500 billion to $350 billion to $183 billion. The price tag for Ukraine has come down. And we know, Vlad, right, this is Trump's MO, his modus operandi, to start high and then to negotiate. The details still have yet to drop, but we can infer that this deal has been made at least a little bit more palatable by Ukraine with the cost.
Look, this is, I mean, if you are a student of world history, as I say, you will have seen this playbook before. The problem is oftentimes when these countries exploit smaller, weaker countries for their natural resources and they bleed them dry, then those countries are at risk themselves of becoming failed states. This has happened. Ramey, you've been a foreign correspondent longer than I have. You've seen this in the stories that you've reported all around the world. So the question is, how is the U.S. preparing for the fact that this might have real-world problems and issues for Ukrainians, even if there's peace achieved between the Russians and the Ukrainians?
Sure. The phrase that I'll throw out listening to that is you deal with the devil you do and the devil that you don't, or the devil you don't want to. And in this case, the choice is being made by Vladimir Zelensky and the Kyiv government, whether they want to go and give in and to, let's say, lose the war with Russia, or to deal with Trump and to say, we will make this deal. Maybe not whatever you ask, but come to some kind of negotiated terms, which appears to be what's happened here, in order to get to this state where we are, to trade profits, for example, titanium, which Ukraine has one of Europe's biggest reserves in, used in aircraft, missiles, lithium, another mineral of which Ukraine has perhaps one of Europe's largest reserves as well, graphite, which is an industrial lubricant, rare earths. Earlier we had a graphic up on the screen, a map. I wonder if we could put that up there. And I talk about this. Look to the right side of your screen, and there's a swath of red where Russian-occupied Ukraine is, and you can see that that red swath is a massive deposit of rare earth materials, but half of that also is controlled by Russia. So this also is a problem, is a dilemma for Ukraine in terms of dealing with whatever minerals deal that they want to do with the United States, that some of it is controlled by Russia and the rest of it the U.S. potentially wants.
And Ramey, really quickly, is the NATO, at least the path to pursuing NATO citizenship, off the table, even if Ukraine agrees to this deal?
It appears that there has been no movement on that, let's say. Of course, President Volodymyr Zelensky still wants that to happen. Putin saying that he does not want that to happen at all. The United States, President Trump, not being clear, being vague on what that could be. But Ukraine, whether it's inside NATO or being outside of NATO, wants a security guarantee from the United States. And if not the U.S., then at least some kind of Western security guarantee. And to your question, Vlad, that alludes to potentially NATO, or let's say parts of NATO, if the bloc were to hold up over the next few months. It appears that that security guarantee has not been resolved. So looking ahead, we're waiting to see really that phrase or that lack thereof. But one belief is that tying the U.S. economy to Ukraine's economy through this minerals deal could, in fact, make that security guarantee, whether it's official or not, at least a de facto reality.
All right, Ramy Inocencio breaking it down for us in ways only he can. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, higher than usual temperatures are gripping most of the country right now. Gripping, I think people like it because it's sort of spring-like, but it's not expected to last much longer. So let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Andrew Kozak with the first look at the national forecast. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Vlad. Yeah, we're going to start with the positive first, and that is, yes, after a very cold winter season so far for so many people, we have been above average, especially across the eastern half of the country. And it's very nice that a lot of folks are now replacing 20s and 30s with 50s and 60s across the area. Much of the country is also on the dry side, including and especially the Pacific Northwest, where after several days of the atmospheric river giving heavy rain, flooding, and snow, we're finally clearing things out, not just getting the rain off with, but we're also taking away the cloud cover and keeping mostly sunny skies. East Coast today looking very nice, but there is a weak clipper system that is coming through. This is actually going to open the door for us to get in on some colder air once we get into the second half of the upcoming weekend. It is also going to give us some rain and snow in the higher elevations. By later on tonight and into tomorrow morning, we're looking at some moderate to even heavy downpours across portions of the I-95 corridor. We'll say from Boston all the way down to D.C. and eventually Virginia and North Carolina. This is out of here once we get into the later part of your Thursday and early Friday with just a couple of leftover lake effect snow showers. But yes, it does open the door to colder weather. We have been in the 50s and 60s up and down the East Coast. We'll be in the 30s by the time we get to Sunday. Vlad?
All right, Andrew Kozak, thank you very much. A close call on a Chicago runway after a Southwest plane and a small jet narrowly avoid collision. Look at this video. We're going to have details of what happened. That's coming up next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. The pilots of this Southwest Airlines plane avoided a potentially catastrophic collision on a runway in Chicago yesterday. You can see as the plane is pulling in for a landing, the pilot decides to take the plane back up because there is a commuter private jet that crossed right directly in its path. This is just the latest, of course, in a series of scares and accidents at the nation's airports in recent weeks. CBS News Chicago reporter Marissa Perlman filed this report from Midway.
That's right. Can't even imagine being on that plane in that moment, based on what we know now. But some of those passengers actually tell us they didn't really know what was going on, find out the scope of all of this until hours after this flight actually landed. So the investigation, where it stands right now, the NTSB and the FAA will be handling this. And they're trying to find out how this business jet got access to the runway here without authorization. Southwest Flight 2504 was heading from Omaha here to Chicago Midway. The video shows the moments their plane tried to land at Midway when that private jet starts taxiing across the runway. 2504 was just feet from the ground when that pilot takes back up the plane to avoid the jet. Passengers on board tell us there were about 100 people on the plane at the time, and despite knowing something wasn't exactly right, they tell us nobody panicked.
I always say a prayer before I travel all the time anyway, which is good. And then, of course, said another little prayer after the accelerated, because I knew there was something not right. And then the pilot did come on and say that there was a plane on the runway. It took another 10 minutes. We had to circle back around and land. But it was pretty amazingly calm on the flight.
Southwest says their crew performed a precautionary go-around to avoid the other aircraft here. Now, we spoke with a pilot and former air traffic controller who says what the pilot did was textbook, and the private jet pilot likely didn't look both ways.
They did a perfect go-around. They would have absolutely seen the Southwest jet about to land on the runway because the visibility is incredible today.
Now, transportation experts do say that flying is still very safe despite all of these aviation accidents we've been talking about. They say none of them are connected. There is no pattern here. Now, we want to let you know we just heard from President Trump via the Truth Social app about this incident. He writes, "Great job by the Southwest pilots in Chicago. A nearly tragic close call. Perhaps suspend the pilot's license on the other plane, who may have been, quote, sleeping." Now, the private jet company FlexJet says they are now conducting their own internal investigation into all of this and say they will, quote, rectify the situation. We're live at Midway. I'm Marissa Perlman, CBS News Chicago.
All right, Marissa, thank you.
All right, that was coverage from CBS News Chicago. Of course, we'll have much more from Marissa Perlman in our next hour. Meanwhile, federal employees who may have been working remotely since the COVID-19 pandemic are being ordered to return to the office. Elon Musk issued a warning earlier this week that those who fail to return in person will be placed on administrative leave. I want to bring in award-winning author Daniel Pink for more on this. He's the author of The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us. Let's just talk about, look, I get that in the private sector that people are used to getting emails like this or directives like this from managers. Hey, tell me what you did last week. I want to be up to speed as to what you're doing and what you're working on. But not if it's not done properly. For example, if I had a leader, if I had a manager who had no idea, no understanding of what my job was to begin with and asked me to justify that job, that might create some anxiety in the workplace and even perhaps a power struggle between the people who actually run a department and, for example, the CEO of the company. Can you explain a little bit of that?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I can explain fully what's going on here, but you have a guy with no experience in the federal government parachuting in with a group of 21-year-olds trying to remake the entire thing. And so you have to ask whether the anxiety that it's causing is the point of the exercise. That these return to office mandates throughout both the private sector and the public sector are generally a pretty bad idea. We know that from a whole raft of research. Generally, where most workplaces are going right now, most effective workplaces are going right now, is some form of hybrid. And that should be also true for the federal workforce as well. And you know, remember, the federal workforce today is about the same size as it was 30 years ago. And the idea that the federal workforce is, I'm a Washingtonian, is full of people who are simply pushing papers is completely wrong. There are air traffic controllers who are federal employees, park rangers, people who are doctors in VA hospitals. And so what's happening right now should be alarming to all citizens.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, if you're a doctor in the Veterans Administration and you're working to better the lives of those who have sacrificed so much for our country, how do you justify it to a guy who runs a technology company? And so I wonder, now the return to work thing is interesting. Look, I'm somebody who likes coming into work. I feel that I do better in that situation. But as you point out, there are statistics and there's data that points out that companies who have employed this hybrid work model are actually doing better than they did before the pandemic and before these hybrid models were implemented. So I wonder if, as you say, it's an interesting thought, which is that perhaps the goal isn't necessarily that these members of Congress actually care about whether people are in the office or not. The goal is to just upset the balance of equilibrium that perhaps the opposition feels, or perhaps people who are opposed to what they're doing feel.
I think that's, I mean, again, far be it from me to get inside the head of Elon Musk and infer and all of his intentions, but I do think that that has to be part of it. What we know, Vlad, as exactly as you say, is that companies, organizations that have gone to hybrid work have generally been pretty satisfied with it. Now, there are some big banks and things that are issuing these return to work mandates. But what we know, there's a very important study came out in the journal Nature last year by Nick Bloom at Stanford, who's one of the premier researchers in this. What it showed is that when companies that have hybrid environments, not fully remote, but hybrid environments, there's no decline in productivity, there's no decline in satisfaction, but there is an important uptick in retention. And right now, if you undo some of this remote work, it operates essentially as a pay cut to workers. Remember, we've been doing this remote stuff for 5 years. All right, that's a very difficult egg to unscramble. And so if you're going to undo remote work after 5 years, what it means is people are going to be paying more for gasoline. People are going to be paying more for dry cleaning to get someone else to walk their dogs. And so this is why you have, especially in the private sector, some resistance against this return to work mandate.
Fascinating. Daniel Pink, thanks so much for joining us, man. Come back anytime.
Pleasure. Thanks, Vlad.
All right. All right, this morning, the Supreme Court is hearing arguments for a case that could have major implications on discrimination cases in the workplace. We'll explain what's at stake and what this case is all about. It's coming up next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Got some breaking news to report. The Associated Press is reporting now that one person has died from the measles outbreak in West Texas. We've obviously been tracking that outbreak there for several weeks, which has grown to more than 100 cases across 9 different counties. I want to bring in CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca, who's been tracking this story for the last couple of days for us. Omar, what are you learning? Tell me about this person, if you have any information about this person who succumbed to this illness.
Well, right now, Vlad, Lubbock Covenant, which is the hospital here in Lubbock, it's a children's hospital. A spokesperson for the hospital tells us that they are not confirming anything and they don't know where AP got that story, but they are telling us that there is a 3 o'clock press conference. We've also reached out to city officials, county health department officials, and state health department officials. And everything is quiet right now. They're not confirming anything or telling us everything. Hopefully we'll learn before that. If not, hopefully at that 3 o'clock press conference.
You know, Omar, I was watching your piece this morning on CBS Mornings, and as you know, we had Dr. Celine Gounder on to talk about this. And I asked her in the break if we're to assume that the people who were stricken with measles in your reporting and the other reports that we've seen are folks who were unvaccinated, because that seems to be a question that I'm never clear on. Are people getting this because they're not vaccinated, because their children are not vaccinated?
Well, and what we said in that story, Vlad, is this started in an unvaccinated Mennonite community that's in Gaines County, county seat being Seminole, here in West Texas. So that's a community religious, and their choice is to not get vaccinated really for anything. They don't have to go to public schools. They homeschool, so that requirement, there's no exemption that's needed because they don't go to public schooling. Most of them are homeschooled. The majority of the cases that have happened in Gaines County are from that Mennonite community. The thing is, they interact with the general public. They'll go to a big box store or Walmart to grab groceries. They'll go to grab supplies in other places, and that's where they will run into people. Now, some of the early numbers that we saw from the state is that most of is hitting children in the community, 17 and under. I mean, I'm talking a majority of the cases are children, but people who are getting it, who are not part of the Mennonite community, could be getting it if they were not vaccinated themselves. We've seen vaccination rates drop several points here over the last 10 years, almost 10 percentage points. So that is going to have an effect. And I'm sure Dr. Gounder said that the best way to fight the measles is getting the vaccine. It's much better than other vaccines. To compare it to COVID, you could get a COVID shot, but you could still get COVID, and the symptoms wouldn't be as bad. If you get the measles vaccine, there's a 97% chance you will not even get measles. If you happen to get a breakthrough case, you will not be able to transmit it. So that's why health officials across the country, really here in the state right now, are opening up testing, but also having the vaccine readily available for people who want it.
And so the question, of course, becomes what are health officials saying about how they are working to contain this outbreak, because the other thing that Dr. Gounder told me, which was sort of interesting, is that once you have measles, actually it weakens the immune system so much that you are now susceptible to a whole host of other illnesses that might come afterwards.
Well, right now what they're doing is pushing testing in certain counties that are high hit, and also having clinics where people can go in and get the vaccine. In Lubbock here, they told us last week they were averaging roughly 20 people a day coming in to get the measles vaccine, which is a pretty good number for people to come in. Mind you, this is happening as state lawmakers are meeting in Austin, and they meet once every 2 years. So I can guarantee you state health commissioners are talking to lawmakers to see about what can be done, because while they're meeting in Austin, this is the biggest measles outbreak in more than 30 years in Texas, and it's happening in West Texas.
Wow. All right. Omar Villafranca on the story for us this morning. Thank you, Omar, for jumping in front of a camera with the breaking news. We appreciate it. All right. Today, the Supreme Court will take up the case of a woman who claims she was being discriminated against her at her job because she's straight. She's heterosexual. Marlene Ames brought the case forward after a situation at work with the Ohio Department of Youth Services. CBS News legal correspondent Jan Crawford breaks down the case for us.
Well, this case came about when Marlene Ames, who was working in the Ohio Department of Youth Services, decided to put in for promotion at work. But then instead of getting this promotion, she actually found out she was being demoted. She was getting moved down to a job as a secretary, and a colleague of hers who was a gay man was getting her job. And then she found out that instead of the promotion that she had applied for, that promotion went to a gay woman. So she told us when we interviewed her in Akron that she thought something more was going on, and she decided to sue. Now, her lawyers told us that they knew it was a tough case because Ohio, like 19 other states, as well as the District of Columbia, requires people who are suing for discrimination under federal civil rights law to prove something more, that they were victims of like a pattern of historical discrimination. And that's something that's sometimes hard for non-minority to show because they weren't typically discriminated against historically. So that's the issue in the case, and how hard can it be for her to show that? She was unable to, so therefore she couldn't pursue her case in court. Now, the justices hearing arguments, they may be somewhat sympathetic to her claims. They're very kind of insistent on that level playing field on some of these race cases, as we've seen in recent terms. The Biden administration also has said they wanted a rule that was across the board, across the country, the same, and the Trump administration agrees with that, asking the justices to throw out that lower court ruling and give Marlene Ames her chance to prove her case in court. Back to you.
All right, Jan, thank you very much. Pope Francis remains in critical but stable condition this morning. The Vatican says he spent another restful night in the hospital and is eating normally nearly 2 weeks following his initial admission. CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay joins us now from outside the Vatican with more on this. So how's he doing this morning, Chris?
Hey, Vlad. Well, the good news is he's not doing any worse. As you mentioned, he's able to eat on his own. He's able to sit up in an armchair, eating normally, I should emphasize. So that means not with an eating tube, not intravenously. So the Vatican is showing that he's definitely not getting worse. He's also kind of back to his old routine. He was able to visit with a couple of cardinals yesterday where they discussed promoting several cases of potential sainthood, one of whom is an American who was killed in a POW camp during the Korean War. So it's almost as if business as usual, even if it's from Pope Francis's hospital bed, which he's done on 3 other occasions. This is the 4th time he's been hospitalized since 2021 alone, but he's definitely not out of the woods. They're quick to emphasize that he's still in critical condition, but he is stable, Vlad.
And as you know, Chris, Pope Francis may be unable to lead prayers, but his teachings have still been front and center. Tell me something about that.
Yeah, well, so they've been holding rosary recitations for him since the beginning of the week, and that's going to continue indefinitely just to reflect, how grave the situation is. Also today, he should have held his Wednesday general audience here behind me in St. Peter's Square. Instead, the Vatican released the text of his catechesis, or the sermon that he would have read to the faithful gathered behind me, and it's quite poignant when you consider where he is and where his health is right now. It comes from the Gospel of Luke, this passage that he cited, and it goes like this: "Now, Master, you may let your servant go in peace, according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation." Now, this is something that was written, according to the Vatican, long before today's general audience, but nevertheless, it does come with some added profundity considering the situation he finds himself in.
Indeed. All right, Chris Livesay from the Vatican reporting for us this morning. Thank you, friend. All right, back to weather now. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Andrew Kozak with another look at the national forecast. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Vlad. Yeah, we're talking about a lot of sunshine for a large portion of the country. Not only that, but we're also looking at above average temperatures. Let's go ahead and bring the globe out, show you the cloud cover that we have right now across the area. We really don't have a whole lot going on for much of the country, despite the cloud cover that you see across the especially northern half of the country. A lot of this is along a clipper system that'll bring some rain tomorrow. But for the time being, we've got warm temperatures, and many of us averaging in some cases between 10 and 15 degrees above where we should be for this time of year. You know it's not going to last, so soak it all in as you get into your Wednesday and your Thursday and your Friday, because by the end of the weekend, that's when we're going to see the big changes. Not a whole lot happening across the midsection today. Northwest, especially the Pacific Northwest, finally clearing out. We had that atmospheric river sending waves of rain between last Friday and earlier this week. About Monday night into yesterday morning, we had between 6 and 8 inches of rain for areas like Seattle to Portland, even into Idaho and Montana, finally turning that off. Now we have a clipper system that is approaching the northeast. Some rain, even some snow over toward Detroit. We have rain across areas like Columbus and Cleveland. This will eventually make its way across the East Coast later on tonight and into tomorrow. By 10 o'clock tonight, we could even have some moderate to heavy rain across the I-95 corridor, basically from Maine all the way down to Virginia and the Carolinas. That's out of here once we get into your Thursday night and Friday, followed by some sunshine. But take a look at where we are. Look at Raleigh. Nearly 10 degrees above average for today, highs in the 70s. Even New York looking at highs in the 50s. A little cooler back toward the north and the west, but even these temperatures are either just about where they should be or just a little bit closer to about 2 to 3 degrees above average. We're average temperatures into the day tomorrow, and once we get into Friday, a nice warming trend continues. By the end of the weekend, though, many of us in the 50s and 60s will see 20s and 30s, kind of a dose of reality. Brad?
All right, Andrew Kozak, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up, President Trump was delivered several legal setbacks yesterday. We'll discuss those and the implications. That's coming up next. President Trump was dealt not one, but 3 legal defeats in the span of just 90 minutes yesterday. These cases involve the cuts to several programs in the federal government. So I want to bring in CBS News political reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman to break these down for me. So this is pretty stunning. I did see a lot of MAGA faithful on the internet talking about impeaching these judges because they're not kowtowing to what the president wants to do. We're bending over backwards to accommodate the president. But legally speaking, what was the rationale for these decisions?
I mean, 3 different decisions came down in that 90-minute span, as you said, and they were each really a rebuke to these efforts by the Trump administration. There were 3 separate issues here, Vlad. One is that a judge had issued a temporary restraining order. This is related to foreign assistance funding. He said it was not being complied with, and he really reprimanded the Trump lawyers in this court. He was trying to ask them about what was going on with this funding freeze. It's been 12 days since he issued this order, and he was shocked that they couldn't give him any facts about it. So he has now said that they have to pay this out by midnight tonight. This is hundreds of millions of dollars, and the DOJ is appealing. There's some news that the USAID funding recipients have until 1 p.m. to respond to this, but this could all play out very quickly. Another decision that was made in that 90-minute span was a judge blocked the Office of Management and Budget from freezing federal assistance. This is federal grants and loans. She said that the nonprofits that had brought this case just showed that it would be an economic catastrophe for them to do this. You know, she was essentially saying that they can't just pause $3 trillion in funding overnight or expect these federal agencies in 24 hours to review all of these grants and loans for compliance. It's just too high a burden.
So they're not saying that all they're saying is that there needs to be some type of methodology and implementation before these things can happen, right? It's not ruling as to whether or not he can or can't do these things.
I mean, one, I think it shows they're just happening too fast, but with the preliminary injunctions, it does show that they think there's a strong likelihood that the plaintiffs could prevail. So that is the case here. And then the third ruling was related to blocking Trump's effort to suspend the U.S. refugee resettlement program. That was another preliminary injunction. And here they're saying that Trump does have, broad discretion, but he may have exceeded his authority in this case. This is a program that was implemented by Congress over 40 years ago. We've let in 3 million refugees through this program, and he just might not have the right to do this here.
Let me ask you about these Department of Justice rules that the president, that have to do with the January 6 pardons that cover other crimes, but there's also this renewed push to have details of Jack Smith's investigation released as well. What do you have on that?
So there's a multi-pronged effort to get that second volume of Jack Smith's final report released. And as a reminder, that's about the classified documents case. It was not released because there was still a pending case against his co-defendants going on in the 11th Circuit. So Judge Cannon, who had presided over the case, issued an injunction. Now there's an effort to get both that injunction lifted and this report released. And one argument that I think is really interesting comes from the Knight First Amendment Institute. And what they're saying is that when the report became a part of the case in Judge Cannon's court, it essentially became a judicial record. She had asked the Department of Justice to submit it so she could review it. She relied on its contents when she decided to issue that injunction. And so as a judicial record, there is a presumption of a right of access to the public. So essentially, it's not just up to the Department of Justice whether this gets released, they're saying. It's up to the court. So they've entered this motion to Judge Cannon's courtroom. She'll make a decision on it. I think we will likely see this elevate to the 11th Circuit.
Wow.
But, it's interesting that they're basically saying this should now be a public court document that we get to see.
Wow. All right. To be continued, no doubt. Katrina Kaufman, always great to have you here in studio. Thank you very much. All right. Much more news ahead. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. All right, folks, welcome back to CBS News 24/7. In honor of Black History Month, we're introducing you to an incredible woman who pioneered the way for Black women at the University of Pennsylvania's medical school. CBS News Philadelphia medical reporter, Stephanie Saul, has her story.
There's lots of laughter at tea time at the Simpson house. One of the residents, 91-year-old Dr. Arlene Bennett, is the first African-American woman to graduate from the University of Pennsylvania Medical School in 1964.
I worked hard, and I was rewarded for that hard work. I decided I wanted to be a doctor at 9, and that was my dream, and I just followed it through.
She was born in Philly and went to Girls High.
This was in the yearbook. Arlene, a brilliant pianist, I've played the piano since I was 4, is helpful and generous.
And in a special turn of fate, some of her friends at Simpson House also went to Girls High. And decades later, they're still having a good time together. After high school, the future Dr. Bennett joined the Air Force so the GI Bill would pay for college.
They trained me as an airborne radio mechanic. And for a long time, I was the only female in the squadron.
At Penn, she majored in zoology, chemistry, and pediatrics. Did you like medical school?
I loved it.
But after a few years of being a pediatrician, Dr. Bennett switched specialties.
The parents drove me into psychiatry.
She's not as mobile these days, but has been practicing psychiatry for decades. Was it difficult, and did you face a lot of discrimination?
I think it was there, but I think my philosophy and my attitude made it easier for me to go through. I probably was blessed in that I grew up in a very diverse community.
And she says she grew up with supportive parents with a focus on education.
My life is an example of what happens when you have every educational opportunity that there is out there.
Now she and her husband, who have a son, are enjoying their golden years, with Dr. Bennett reminiscing on her achievements and how she'd like to be remembered.
Determination, faith, and doing the best that I can for people, and trying to leave the world a little bit better than it was when I first came here.
Should be a goal for everyone. Stephanie, thank you very much. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Andrew Kozak with the final look at the national forecast. Hey, Andrew.
It's a very nice day, Vlad. For so many people across the area, now across the country, I should say, across the area of like the Delaware Valley, we're looking pretty good. But the Ohio Valley, the Midwest, this is where we have some rain that continues to come in and push its way over toward the East Coast as we head into tonight and early Thursday. This will provide some much needed rain. Areas across New Jersey down to D.C., they're in a rain deficit, in some cases in a severe to exceptional drought. This is not going to completely put a dent in it, but it'll help a little bit. We're looking anywhere between about a quarter of an inch and a half an inch of rain between late tonight and early Thursday. By the time we get into your Friday, things are looking much better. Today, enjoy very tranquil weather for much of the United States. Vlad?
All right, Andrew, thank you very much. That does it for me, folks. But stay right where you are. After the break, Mugo Diwe is live from San Francisco with all the news breaking from coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.